You speak up in a meeting, and your idea gets ignored, until someone else repeats it, and suddenly everyone agrees. You hesitate to say no when a boss or colleague pushes you, even when it feels wrong. Later you wonder, why didn't I speak up? Decades ago, a psychology experiment revealed something uncomfortable. Ordinary, decent people can be pressured into doing things that go against their own values, simply because someone in authority tells them to. But here's the good news. Understanding why obedience happens also teaches you how influence really works, and how to use those same forces ethically so people listen to you, respect your boundaries, and take you seriously. Today, we're breaking down the influence blueprint hidden inside the Milgram experiments. You've probably had this happen more than once. Your manager asks if you can quickly handle another task, even though your schedule is already packed, and you hear yourself saying, yes. A deadline gets moved up unfairly, and instead of pushing back, you quietly accept it. In meetings, someone louder interrupts or dominates the conversation, and your idea never really lands, even though you know it's solid. Later, on the way home, you replay the moment and think, why didn't I speak up? Here's the important truth. This isn't a character flaw. It isn't weakness. And it definitely isn't a lack of intelligence. It's psychology. Human beings are wired to cooperate, follow structure, and avoid conflict. In many situations, especially when authority or social pressure is involved, obedience feels safer than resistance, even when we know something isn't right or fair. One of the most famous psychology studies ever conducted showed just how powerful this tendency is. In the 1960s, researcher Stanley Milgram ran experiments revealing that ordinary, decent people could be pressured into actions that conflicted with their own values simply because an authority figure instructed them to continue. And that insight matters for your everyday life, at work, in relationships, and in social situations. Before we go further, a quick note. This video is for education and personal development. It's not therapy, legal advice, or clinical guidance. Just practical psychology you can use to improve real conversations. And here's the good news. Once you understand why obedience and influence work, you can use the same principles ethically, not to manipulate people, but to gain cooperation, earn respect, and communicate with confidence. In this video, we'll break down why obedience happens, the influence principles behind it, practical scripts you can use immediately, and how to apply everything ethically so everyone benefits. Because the problem isn't that you're not smart enough. It's that nobody ever taught you influence. And if you want more people to actually listen when you speak, hit like so this video reaches others who need these skills too. To understand why obedience is so powerful, let's look at what actually happened in the Milgram experiments, because the setup was surprisingly simple. Participants were told they were joining a study about learning and memory. When they arrived, they met two people, another participant and a researcher in a lab coat. But here's what they didn't know. The other participant was actually an actor, and the real purpose of the study was to observe how far people would go when following instructions from an authority figure. Roles were assigned. The real participant became the teacher. The actor became the learner. The researcher remained in the room as the authority figure. The teacher was instructed to read word pairs and test the learner's memory. Each time the learner answered incorrectly, the teacher had to administer an electric shock using a machine with switches labeled from mild shocks all the way up to dangerous levels. In reality, no shocks were delivered. But the participants didn't know that. They heard pre-recorded responses, mistakes, complaints, screams, and eventually silence. Before the experiment, psychologists predicted that only a tiny percentage of people would continue to the highest shock levels. Most experts believed participants would refuse early. But the actual results shocked the research world. A majority of participants continued administering shocks all the way to the highest levels, simply because the authority figure calmly told them to continue. Even when participants were sweating, trembling, or begging to stop, many still obeyed when told. The experiment requires that you continue. The key lesson: ordinary people obey authority, even when it makes them deeply uncomfortable. And if you think this only happens in laboratories, think about everyday life. At work, people accept unreasonable workloads because a manager insists it's necessary. In social groups, individuals go along with decisions they privately disagree with. In families and friendships, people stay silent to avoid conflict with stronger personalities. This is where persuasion science comes in. Fields like behavioral science study how people make decisions under pressure. Authority influence research shows how titles, uniforms, and expertise change behavior. And negotiation psychology, including techniques later popularized by negotiators like Chris Voss, explains how communication can either increase pressure or create cooperation. But here's the crucial distinction. Understanding influence doesn't mean manipulating people. Ethical influence aims for mutual benefit, transparency, and respect, not control or deception. And the reason learning these mechanisms matters is simple. Once you understand how influence works on you, you gain the ability to regain control of conversations and eventually guide them in a direction that works for everyone involved. Next, we'll break down the first major influence force revealed by these experiments: authority, and how it shapes everyday decisions more than most people realize. The first influence force revealed by the Milgram experiments is something you experience every day, often without noticing it. It's called the authority principle. And in simple terms, people are more likely to comply with someone they perceive as an authority or expert. This isn't random behavior. For most of human history, following leaders, elders, or experts increased survival. Groups needed coordination. When danger appeared, hesitation could be deadly. So our brains evolved to treat authority as a shortcut for decision-making. If they're in charge, they probably know what they're doing. The problem is, this instinct still operates even when authority is wrong, or when someone only appears authoritative. In everyday life, authority signals show up in subtle ways: job titles and senior roles, uniforms or professional clothing, confident tone of voice, technical language, or expertise signals. At work, for example, a confident manager saying, "We need this done by tomorrow," often gets instant compliance, even when the deadline is unrealistic. Meanwhile, someone with a good idea but a hesitant tone gets ignored. Here's how this often sounds in real conversations. Ineffective phrasing. I think maybe we could try this approach, if that's okay. Persuasive but respectful phrasing. Based on what we've seen so far, this approach should solve the problem faster. I recommend we try this. Notice the difference. Same idea, different delivery. One sounds uncertain, the other sounds credible without being aggressive. You don't need arrogance to project authority. You need clarity. Chris Voss-style negotiation techniques help here through what are called calibrated questions, which are open-ended questions designed to guide cooperation instead of creating resistance. For example, instead of arguing, you can ask, "How would you like this handled?" Here's a quick dialogue example. Manager: "We need this report tonight." You: "It sounds like this deadline is important." Manager: "Yes, leadership needs it." You: "Got it. How would you like this handled if I'm also finishing the client presentation due tomorrow?" Notice what happens. You show respect, but you also calmly signal your own authority over your workload. The ethical use of authority isn't about intimidation. It's about creating confidence and reassurance so people feel safe agreeing with you, not pressured into compliance. And if you believe influence should always be ethical, comment influence below, so others see they're not alone in wanting persuasion to stay respectful and fair. The second influence force revealed in the Milgram experiments explains why people often go along with decisions they don't fully agree with. It's called diffusion of responsibility, and in simple terms, people comply more easily when responsibility feels like it belongs to someone else. In Milgram's studies, obedience dropped significantly when the authority figure left the room, or when participants felt personally responsible for outcomes. But when the researcher stood nearby and calmly insisted they continue, participants felt less personally accountable. Responsibility felt external, like they were just carrying out instructions. And this happens constantly in everyday life. At work, people accept unreasonable demands because management decided. Employees go along with flawed plans because leadership approved it. Teams follow directions they privately doubt because no one feels individually responsible. You've probably heard or even said the phrase, "I'm just following orders." When responsibility feels shared or distant, people comply more easily. But influence improves when responsibility becomes clearer and collaborative instead of imposed. Let's look at how this shows up in conversation. Ineffective response. Passive compliance. Okay, I'll just make it work. This signals acceptance without discussion, even when the request is unrealistic. More persuasive response. Collaborative responsibility. I want to make sure this gets done well. How should we prioritize this alongside the other deadlines? Now, responsibility becomes shared. You're cooperating, not resisting, but you're also making workload decisions visible. A powerful technique from tactical empathy is labeling, which means briefly naming the other person's pressure or concern so they feel understood. For example, it sounds like this deadline is creating a lot of pressure. When people feel understood, they become more open to adjusting plans rather than pushing harder. Here's how it might look in practice. Manager, we need this finished tonight. You. It sounds like there's pressure from leadership to move quickly. Manager, yes, they're pushing hard. You. How can we handle this without delaying the other priorities already in progress? Instead of resisting, you guide the conversation toward shared responsibility and practical solutions. The psychological insight here is simple. When responsibility is clear and shared, conversations become cooperative rather than pressured. And cooperation is where real influence grows. Next, we'll look at another powerful force revealed in obedience research. How small agreements can quietly lead to much bigger commitments than we ever intended. The third major influence force revealed in obedience research explains why people often agree to something small and then find themselves agreeing to something much bigger. This is called the commitment and consistency principle, which simply means once people commit to something, they feel internal pressure to stay consistent with that decision. In the Milgram experiments, participants didn't start with extreme actions. They began with very small shock levels. Each increase seemed minor compared to the previous one. Step by step, the commitment escalated. And because participants had already agreed to continue, stopping later felt like breaking their own commitment. This gradual escalation happens everywhere. You agree to help with one small task at work, and suddenly you're handling half the project. A friend asks for a small favor, and it slowly becomes a larger obligation. A meeting runs 5 minutes longer, then 10, then 30, because no one interrupts the momentum. Small yeses create psychological momentum. But here's where ethical influence matters. Instead of trapping people in commitments, you can guide cooperation step by step in ways that benefit everyone involved. For example, ineffective approach. Can you handle this entire project by tomorrow? That request feels overwhelming and often triggers resistance. More persuasive approach. Could you help with the first section so we can get started today? A smaller commitment feels reasonable. Once progress begins, cooperation becomes easier. You can also use mirroring, a negotiation technique where you repeat key words or phrases to encourage the other person to expand and feel understood. Example: colleague. This timeline feels tight. You. Feels tight? Colleague. Yeah, because we're already juggling other priorities. You. So how do we start this without overloading the team? Notice how the conversation gradually aligns towards solutions instead of resistance. Here's a short dialogue showing gradual alignment in action. Manager. Can your team take this on? You. We can start with phase 1 this week. Manager. That would help. You. Once that's underway, we can map out the next steps together. Agreement grows step by step, instead of being forced all at once. And if you want more practical phrases like this for real conversations, type "yes" in the comments, so I know you want more tools you can use immediately. Now, here's the uncomfortable part. The same authority psychology revealed in the Milgram experiments is still influencing your decisions every day, often without you realizing it. Start with workplace dynamics. A senior manager pushes for unrealistic deadlines. A confident coworker dominates meetings. A client insists something must be done immediately because leadership wants it. Even when you know the request is unreasonable, authority pressure makes resistance feel risky. And this isn't limited to work. Social pressure works the same way. A group decides where to go, what to do, or how late to stay out, and people quietly go along, even when they'd rather do something else. Strong personalities often become unofficial authorities simply because they speak with certainty. Marketing and sales environments also use authority cues constantly. Experts in lab coats in commercials, professionals endorsing products, or companies using phrases like industry standard or recommended by specialists. None of this automatically means manipulation. Authority can guide good decisions. But problems arise when authority is used to push people into choices that don't serve them. And here's the key point. Intelligent, capable people still comply, because obedience isn't about intelligence. It's about psychological conditioning. Humans are wired to avoid social conflict and follow perceived leadership. So how do you recognize manipulative authority? Watch for red flags. Pressure to decide immediately. Dismissal of your concerns. Statements that imply you have no choice. Authority used to silence discussion rather than guide solutions. When you notice this happening, you don't need to become confrontational. You just need respectful pushback. For example, instead of saying, "This deadline is impossible," try, "I want to make sure we deliver quality work. How can we adjust priorities to meet this timeline realistically?" Or instead of, "That won't work," try, "It sounds like this is urgent. Help me understand what flexibility we have here." These responses use tactical empathy, acknowledging the other person's pressure while protecting your own position. You're not rejecting authority. You're engaging it constructively. And once you understand how authority influences behavior, something powerful happens. You stop being controlled by these forces and start using them ethically yourself. Because influence works both ways. And next, we'll look at how to turn these psychological forces into ethical influence that earns cooperation instead of compliance. So far, we've talked about how authority and obedience influence people, and how those forces sometimes work against you. Now comes the important shift. Using the same psychology ethically to build influence, instead of just defending yourself from pressure. Think of this as your ethical influence blueprint. Effective influence combines 3 elements: clear authority, tactical empathy, and shared responsibility. Authority gives your words weight. Empathy keeps conversations cooperative. Responsibility makes solutions feel mutual instead of imposed. The goal isn't dominance, it's alignment. A simple way to start guiding conversations is through calibrated questions that invite collaboration. For example, instead of arguing or resisting, you can ask, "Help me understand what you're hoping to achieve here." Or, "What would success look like in this situation?" These questions do two things. They show respect for the other person's goals, and they position you as someone helping solve the problem rather than someone blocking progress. Let's look at how this transforms a conversation. Before, passive compliance. Manager: "I need this finished tonight." You: "Okay, I'll figure it out." You accept pressure without discussion, even if it harms other priorities. After, ethical influence. Manager: "I need this finished tonight." You: "It sounds like this is urgent." Manager: "Yes, leadership needs it." You: "Help me understand which outcome matters most, so we handle this the right way." Manager: "We mainly need the summary tonight." You: "Perfect. I'll focus on the summary now and finish the rest tomorrow." Notice what changed. You didn't resist. You guided the conversation toward a workable solution. Confidence without aggression sounds calm, direct, and cooperative. You speak clearly, ask thoughtful questions, and show you're focused on success, not conflict. This is ethical influence in action. Everyone keeps dignity, and outcomes improve. And if you know someone at work who's smart but keeps getting talked over or pressured into unfair situations, share this video with them so they can start building these influence skills too. Let's walk through a realistic workplace situation and apply everything we've covered so far. Imagine this. It's late afternoon, and your manager assigns you a large new task, even though you're already handling multiple deadlines. Many people respond automatically. Ineffective response. Passive compliance. Manager: "I need you to take this on as well." You: "Okay, I'll try to make it work." You agree, feel stressed, and end up working late. The manager assumes your workload is manageable because you didn't signal otherwise. The pattern repeats. Now let's apply the influence blueprint step by step. Step 1. Tactical empathy labeling. You name the pressure the other person is under. You: "It sounds like this project suddenly became urgent." This shows understanding instead of resistance, which lowers defensiveness. Step 2. Mirroring concerns. Encourage them to explain more. Manager: "Yes, leadership wants progress immediately." You: "Immediately?" Mirroring often prompts clarification, giving you more information and slowing the pressure. Step 3. Calm authority projection. You signal confidence over your workload without sounding confrontational. You: "Right now, I'm finishing the client proposal due tomorrow, and I want to make sure both projects succeed." You're positioning yourself as someone protecting results, not avoiding work. Step 4. Calibrated question. Invite collaboration. You: "How would you like me to prioritize these so both get done properly?" Now responsibility becomes shared instead of imposed. Step 5. Mutual solution framing. Manager: "Let's push part of the new project to next week." You: "Perfect. I'll start the initial section today and schedule the rest after the proposal." Notice what happened psychologically. You showed empathy, slowed the pressure, projected competence, and guided the conversation toward a solution that worked for both sides. No conflict, no manipulation, just ethical influence. And this is the real lesson. Influence isn't about winning conversations. It's about shaping outcomes so cooperation feels natural and productive for everyone involved. Influence skills aren't only for the workplace. In many ways, they matter even more in personal situations, where saying no can feel uncomfortable or even guilt-inducing. Think about common scenarios. A friend pressures you to go out when you're exhausted. A family member expects you to handle responsibilities simply because you usually do. Social plans keep expanding until your weekend disappears, even though you needed rest. Most people respond in one of two ways. They either give in quietly or push back emotionally, which creates tension. But ethical influence lets you protect boundaries without damaging relationships. Let's apply the blueprint step by step. First, start with empathy. Friend, come on, you never come out anymore. It sounds like you really want everyone together tonight. You acknowledge their feeling without immediately agreeing. Next, frame your boundary calmly. Instead of saying, I'm not going, which can feel abrupt, try, I've had a long week and really need to recharge tonight. Then move to collaborative solutions. How about we plan something this weekend when I can actually enjoy it? Now you're not rejecting the relationship. You're proposing a better option. This approach works with family expectations too. Family member, you always handle this, so can you do it again? I know this is important, and I've helped before. Right now my schedule's tight. How can we divide this so everyone contributes? You remain cooperative while making responsibility shared. To build this skill, try a quick practice exercise. Think of a phrase you often use when you feel pressured. Something like, okay, I guess I can do it. Rewrite it using empathy and boundaries, such as, I want to help, but I need to handle my priorities first. Let's figure out another way. Mental rehearsal also helps. Before your next social or family situation, imagine the conversation and practice your response calmly. Influence improves when preparation replaces hesitation. Here's your influence challenge for the coming week. Choose one small situation where you usually give in and apply empathy plus a clear boundary with a collaborative solution. And if this is helping you rethink how influence works in real life, comment blueprint. So I know you're actively building these skills on purpose. Let's bring everything together. The Milgram experiments revealed something uncomfortable, but incredibly useful. Ordinary people often obey authority, even when it conflicts with their own comfort or judgment. But once you understand the psychology behind obedience, you can turn that knowledge into ethical influence instead of silent compliance. Here's your influence blueprint recap. First, we saw the power of authority influence. People naturally listen to those who appear confident, credible, or in charge. When you communicate clearly and calmly, your ideas carry more weight without needing aggression. Second, we learned about responsibility. When responsibility feels distant or external, people comply more easily. But when responsibility becomes shared and visible, conversations shift toward cooperation and practical solutions. Third, we explored commitment and consistency, where small agreements lead to bigger ones. Ethical influence uses this gradually and transparently, guiding cooperation step by step rather than forcing decisions. And tying all of this together is tactical empathy, showing you understand the other person's pressures and goals so they become open to working with you instead of against you. The most important reminder is this: influence isn't something you're born with. It's a skill. And like any skill, it improves with awareness and practice. And the fact that you're here learning these principles already puts you ahead of most people who keep struggling without ever understanding why conversations go the way they do. So here's your final influence challenge. This week, choose one real conversation, at work, with friends, or in your family, where you usually stay quiet or give in. Apply one technique from this video. Label pressure, ask a calibrated question, or propose a collaborative solution. Watch how the conversation shifts. Now, if you learned at least one technique you're going to try this week, like the video so more people can discover these ethical persuasion tools too. Comment below with the next real situation where you want more influence, and include the keyword influence. So I know you're serious about building this skill. And subscribe to the Influence Blueprint and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next set of practical ethical persuasion tools and conversation scripts.